recording right now. So this session will be recorded and will be posted online for additional viewing for those who could make it today and those who could not. Again, my name is Dr. Faith Dukes. I am our K-12 STEM Education Manager here at Berkeley Lab. And we'll just get to Berkeley Lab. Is a Department of Energy national laboratory founded in 1931. It was founded around team science and the ability for scientists, engineers, staff members, and those who love science to get together and do innovative work. It is the home of 14 Nobel Prize winners, as well as was credited with discovering 16 of the elements on the periodic table. So we are proud of the work and innovation that has been done here at Berkeley Lab, and we look forward to more discoveries and hearing from some of our laboratory staff here today, as well as some colleagues in the field from around California who are also joining us on this call. As we said, this is LB Now Next, or K-12. So if you are interested in more K-12 work, programs, and events that are taking place, you can find them on our website, k12education.lbl. We'll also put that in the chat box, and you can get more information, sign up for our listings, and think about other programs that you might want to attend in the future. As well as these STEM career talks will take place for the rest of the year every 2 weeks. So today we're talking visualizing STEM. Next, in the next 2 weeks, we'll be talking about cybersecurity and what does it mean to a researcher to actually do cybersecurity work and privacy. And lastly, we'll be talking about in November, thinking outside the lab. There are some researchers who do not go to a laboratory when they start their work. So they will be going out into the field, they'll be traveling, they'll be doing work outside of the normal laboratory, and they'll be talking about their experiences doing that work then. Finally, I want to thank you for joining us for this talk today with our special guests, Dr. Samari Quinones, Kristen Farley, Professor Clifford Johnson, and Dr. Moon Yi, who are all talking about how they are doing scientific art. They all either have a background in STEM or graphic art and design, and they are talking about how they are combining those two passions in their life and their career in order to do work that communicates science. And so we're happy to have them here today. And our first speaker will be Dr. Moon Yi, who is a postdoctoral scholar here at Berkeley Lab. So I'll let her come on screen and start her video and start with her introduction.
Thank you, Faith. Thank you for having me here. So hi, I am Moon. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And so currently I'm working at the Department of Ecology, and I work on 2 projects here, as you can see, called AmCafe and Enigma. And in both cases, I'm working with microbial interactions in the soil on the roots in the rhizosphere or in the deep subsurface. So this is just introduction for me as a STEM professional. And if we could go to the next slide, I just want to quickly talk to you about the career path that has brought me to here. So I'm from Myanmar or Burma, where I did my high school, and then because in STEM you have to sort of follow where the science is, and that has brought me to all these different places where I did, for example, the next steps in education. Like I got to do my diploma in Singapore, and then I went to Australia, Sydney for my undergrad, and then moving on to Denmark for my grad school, and yeah, and then now I'm here in the U.S. And the reason why I'm putting it out like this here is because I wanted to emphasize how like if you're interested in an academic career, it's being able to travel is one of the perks that comes with it. And as you can see, I haven't gotten to put the details of each of these steps, but all of these are basically mostly for STEM related education. So then, if you want to do something that is both STEM and art, you have to find you have to find your own niche in a way. And for me, the the fact that I was able to go to many places has helped me to find that niche. So if you go to the next slide, I can show you like where I met all these people through my networks of scientists, where I got to be able to do all these scientific work. So, for example, when I was in Sydney, I got to work with my professor who would like to start microbiology books for kids, and to educate young people about what are microbes and how they're not just germs and how useful they are and things like that. And just because I'm a microbiologist, you know, I personally feel like this is something that I would like to propagate as well. So I got this opportunity to work with him together, and then moving to Denmark, there's always colleagues who know someone who's looking for some art in science, and that's where I also got to get connected to scientific publishers, where I got to work on journal covers and editorials, and now some book covers instead. And now moving on to here, um, you know, like new opportunities and like new places bring new opportunities. And here I got to meet with my really awesome colleagues, where we started a nonprofit organization to make this STEM and art into more video format so that it becomes more open access to students. And yeah, so this is so far my career path in terms of STEM and art. And I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Yi. So we'll go to our next speaker, Ms. Kristen Farley, who is a scientific graphic artist here at Berkeley Lab.
Hi, thank you. Yes, as Faith mentioned, I'm a scientific graphic artist. I work within the energy technologies area at Berkeley Lab. And specifically, I work in the communications department, and we work really closely with the program development office. So I'm usually generating materials that are going to the outside world and trying to help the lab get funding to do the research. My role at the lab is I do anything from designing logos to proposals and reports. I also design, complex graphics that help visualize the scientists' research. So as far as my career path, I would have to say it really started in high school when I became the editor of my high school yearbook. And that was really when I first discovered design for the first time. And I really enjoyed putting together the visual themes throughout the yearbook and telling that story of my senior year. So that's when I decided to study graphic design in college. I went to Chico State, and I went into the graphic design program. And I got an internship. That's definitely something that's really important when you're in college and trying to get experience. Internships are really, really great. And then after college, I went to Cater Communications. And that's a small PR firm, and they were located in the Bay Area, and they focus on climate and energy. And that's really when I started getting into STEM and science. And that's also when I was introduced to Berkeley Lab, and I started doing some really complex graphics for Berkeley Lab. And now I'm at Berkeley Lab as a full-time employee. And so here are some samples of my work that I've done with Berkeley Lab over the years. You'll see that I will design anything from icons and using colors to showcase like certain categories. And then I'll also design really complex graphics that are, the integrated systems graphic. And that's really, showcasing different elements of a building and how they work together. And basically what I'm doing is I'm translating really complex ideas for scientists, because I've discovered in my career that there's definitely a gap between complex information and more general audiences. And so that's why it's really important for people to think about design, because you have to communicate it to the world and to get funding, and it's just really important. And that's really where my expertise comes in. And
Thank you,
yes.
Kristen.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Professor Clifford Johnson, who is a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Southern California. And he's also a science communicator and a graphic artist and novelist. So thank you, Professor Johnson, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me okay. So very briefly, so yes, I work at the University of Southern California. I'm in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and I work on things like, well, what I like to call origins questions. What's the universe made of? What's everything made of? Where does it all come from? So on and so forth. So a lot of the things done at Berkeley fit into that category. It's really the quest to understand matter, energy, space, and time, and things like that. So those are the sorts of things I do. I career-wise, I had a fairly standard career path, I would say. So I didn't put any of that down on the slide. Instead, what I wanted to do was try and find what is the thing that connects all of the kinds of things I've been doing since I was a child to now, and hopefully beyond. And I would say that's definitely curiosity, which sounds a little obvious because, you know, science, curiosity. But I should say that the curiosity that we often think of when we do science is something that should, in my opinion, be more broadly applied to just how we face out to the world and see other things that maybe aren't necessarily what we're supposed to be doing as scientists. So that in some ways is what helps me bridge to other things like art and literature and history, etc. And that's just by being a troublemaker in some ways, a dabbler, trying to figure things out. And so all through my life, how does it work? How do you make that thing? Why is that thing the way it is? Which, yes, standard questions to ask about science, but are generally what links science to everything else in inquiry, which is those sorts of questions. And so what I showed you here are, what I showed you on the previous slide are things that, you know, I did from back when I was a child, whether it be various kinds of needlework, which I later realized now, looking back, have all the kinds of complex mathematics and structures that you find in particle physics or string theory, what have you, and music and electronics and woodwork, building a guitar and sketching and gardening, all of these things, I think, inform how one fuses science with the arts and the humanities and things like that. So one big project I did on the next slide was this book that came out a couple of years ago called The Dialogues, which combined, if you like, a lot of those passions, a lot of those curiosities, teaching myself how to draw so that I could use the language of graphic novels and studying graphic narrative so that I could learn how to communicate science ideas, and not just the science ideas, but also show that science can be something that belongs to everybody through dialogue and through all different kinds of people. And graphic nonfiction is, I think, a great way of showing that rather than just sort of talking about it in the abstract.
Thank you for that great introduction. We'll get to questions, and people are starting to do great questions in the chat box. We want you to continue them. We will get to our next speaker and allow her to introduce herself, Dr. Samari Quinones, who is a full-time lecturer at Sacramento State, as well as a freelance graphic artist. So Dr. Quinones, please go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you, Faith. Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Samari Quinones. I am a microbiologist by training, and then I am a science illustrator by hobby, I guess. The main thing that I like to draw is women of color as different scientists, and this is what I'm going to be talking to you in a little bit. So if we could get to the next slide. So I started my love for both science and art as a very young kid, and my role model is my mom. If you can see in the picture to the far left, that is my mom working in the lab, and next to her, that is me at 17 doing my first PCR. So my mother used to work as the lab technician for the University of Puerto Rico in Humacao as a microbiology technician preparing for the classes. As a kid, I would go to her lab and I would start by playing with my Barbies, but then it evolved for me to actually helping her, preparing the materials and working in the lab with her. And then at the bottom, you can see that that is one of my first drawings that I made for my mom, and it is a woman torso. And I have that in there to compare the evolution of the skills as to where I started to where I am today, which is the very last picture that you see there. But then as a microbiologist, I followed her footsteps and I did a BS and a PhD, both in microbiology. I did research, I worked the science and everything. But I currently do not do research. My current job is as a lecturer, so I only teach, and I teach genetics at Sacramento State. As part of my job, I am very passionate in helping underrepresented students fulfill their goals of attending graduate school. So I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, including overseeing programs like the LSAMP and RISE programs at Sacramento State. I have then turned my passion for diversity into my work in art. And what I do is that I portray women of color as different scientists and professionals in the STEM fields. And I highlight what they do in their careers as they are holding one of the tools that they work with. One of my favorite pieces is the one that you see on the left, where the woman is holding the brain and her hair is spreading out as the dendrites. So that is representing of the neurosciences. I also like to portray the power of being a scientist. So I draw superhero scientists, like the one in the middle. And then to the far right, you're gonna see a few clips. Those are real women that I have drawn, that they have contacted me so I can portray them in their fields. And then I also think outside of the box, and I have different lines of scientists. So at the top, you see the steampunk scientists, and the part of the STEAM is for science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. And then at the bottom, you can see that it's my Halloween series that I am doing for this month. So at this point, I would like to open it up for any questions that you have. And thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually have all of our panelists turn back on their videos and join us. And sorry, before we get to questions, I'm also going to introduce my co-host for today, who's also going to be asking questions, and that's Edith Lai. Edith, will you please share a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Edith. As Faith said, I work with her at the K-12 office at Berkeley Lab, specifically on digital media content. So for this session, I'll also be looking at the chat box. I'll be watching all your questions so that they can get asked to the panelists.
Awesome. Edith, do you want to start with our first question for our panelists?
Sure. So we're going to start with some general questions about working in STEM and working in the arts. So I want to start with this question. What are some ways in which STEM and art as work processes are similar or different? So when you approach a project or when you collaborate with others, any part of your work process. So I'll start with Dr. Moon Yi.
Yeah, I think actually, if you break it down to it, there aren't many differences. Of course, it's different in the medium and the audience, but like Clifford and Kristen has said earlier, both of it starts with curiosity. Both is about trying to understand the world around you. So you start with that, and then you move on to the part where, so for example, if you take a typical scientific paper, you would first have some sort of introduction at the start where you talk about what is known around the world before, and then you end with a question like, oh, but how about this? And this is the same for, I think, art as well as for science. And then you get to the part then like, okay, then the experimental part, like how do I figure this out? In science, of course, maybe things might be a bit more um, systematic. And in a way, art is also kind of systematic, and you kind of have to choose like what is going to be my medium. Like, do you want to do digital or traditional, for example? And then you get to the results, and then and then you try to describe what the result is and discuss on it. And at the end, both of these processes are ways to communicate what you have found. And in that sense, they're similar, I would say, the whole process from start to end. And on the other hand, they're also similar in a way that both would be a failure if you produce either something that is the same if you try to copy exactly what's been done before, both in science and art. Like, why would you do that, right? So that's just my take on it. That I think, yeah, like they're more similar than different.
Yeah, I come from a design background, and I would definitely agree with that, because typically when I'm creating a graphic, it's a really iterative process. You kind of start at the beginning, what I call a creative brief, and you really are asking all the questions like, what are you looking for? What are we trying to visualize? And ultimately, what is the goal with this graphic? What do you want to accomplish by visualizing it? And then I start developing drafts. I do a sketch and present it to them, and we talk about it, and I make changes. So we kind of go back and forth until it's just right. So it is definitely an iterative process, in much in the same way that research is.
I would say that at least for me, to make a drawing, I have to do the background search, just like you would for an experiment. And then I have to look for references, because I don't know how to draw everything from my mind. So I have to find the right sources and things that I make sure that I am being accurate in depicting what it is that I have in my head. And then you go in and you experiment with the colors and the designs, and this doesn't work, this works, this looks amazing, this looks like trash. So you just keep improving and working through it. And then you provide your result to the public. And then just like the peer review process, they tell you this is good, this is bad, good job, nice try. And then people want to work with you, collaborate. And it's just the same process, same creative process, I would say.
Yeah, I think those are great points, which is that in some ways, like with so many things, they're more similar than they are different, or are often purported to be different. It is important to understand, though, that each area has its own language, and to really do a good job, it's worth taking the time out to learn that language and to learn why certain things work if you're trying to express things in visual art, say, versus whatever your scientific discipline are. There are workflow similarities and all of the kinds of things, as I mentioned, and those, of course, are huge. But each of those things have their own traditions and their own disciplines. And one great thing, the one important thing to do, is to respect other traditions and language structures and figure out how they are the way they are. And that takes time to sort of, cross the aisle and learn those things. Especially if you want to change them, you sort of have to learn what they are. So in my own experience, I spend a lot of time in art museums, just wandering around, looking, immersing myself in the world of art, taking that away, copying styles in order to learn how they work and things like that. And there are similarities there where you reproduce old calculations. If you're a physicist, a theoretical physicist like myself, there's a little time spent doing that as well. That's an analog there where you're sort of learning what the traditions are by redoing them before you can then explode them or do something different.
I'm going to add on to that question. We just got a question in the chat box, and thank you everybody for the wonderful questions that you have. This kind of goes with a few people who have asked this. For someone who is interested in getting more experience in graphic design and visual arts, what software skills and knowledge would you recommend they start with? And if you want to plug in what software you're currently using or have incorporated into your work, that would be really great. So I'll start back with Kristen. If you want to start as the graphic artist, what software and skills would you recommend for someone getting into graphic art?
I use the Adobe Creative Suite, so Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. I think those 3 programs are super important to get into. Those programs are so complex, but there's so many things you can learn. And you can also find websites like lynda.com. It's not lynda.com anymore. But there's online courses you can take to learn how to use these programs. And I use them pretty much every day on a regular basis.
Okay. Moon, go ahead.
Yeah, I can also add to that. So I also use the Adobe programs, but I understand there is a bit of a financial investment involved because they're not free or cheap. So what I also do as an alternative is I have Procreate on my iPad. And of course, it assumes you have an iPad with a pen, because then that is an app that is free and it's really good. And I would recommend that. That would as a start to, if you're thinking about going into digital illustrations. And yeah, and all these things, there are tutorials out there that you can look for. So it's I think with the internet, it's a very good opportunity to learn all these stuff.
PowerPoint is also just, the Microsoft suite, PowerPoint and Excel, you can really format things to look really nicely. And there's even options when you're creating graphs in Excel, you can, choose the format of the graph and you can make it look 3D. I mean, there's tools that you can use to, make things look nice. You don't necessarily have to rely on the Adobe suite. And then also there's things like Canva, which is an online tool that's free and it allows you to create social media graphics online. So that's another great option.
One of the things I get a lot when I do put out a drawing or some other thing out there into the world is that I immediately get those questions. What software did you use? And my perhaps annoying response is that I used my brain. That's the main bit of software. The point being that I think people do obsess a lot about, they think somehow if you have the right magical pen and the right magical bit of software, that is the main thing that'll make your work look great. And actually, the bottom line is that, yes, it's important to learn about the Adobe Creative Suite or Procreate or all these great things. If you're going to plug into a professional workflow because of your job or what have you. But the bottom line is that none of that matters, or at least none of that matters as much as the fundamentals of building up your drawing skill set. So in my opinion, nothing beats spending hours every opportunity you get with just a pencil and a piece of paper, or a pen and a piece of paper, or something like that. Those are the fundamentals, because no matter how powerful a program you have, if you haven't honed your own voice and your own aesthetic, you won't know what to do with those things. It'll just be a mess. And you see that a lot, right? You see a thing that it's just they're using all the tricks from this Photoshop program or what have you, but there's nothing there because they haven't really actually learned the fundamentals of expressing their idea without all of that stuff, without all of the tricks and tools. So yes, find the suites and other software that work for you ultimately, but don't forget that the fundamentals are taking every opportunity to just make marks. And those marks can be digital marks, or they can be physical marks. All the time, wherever I am, I have some kind of notebook with me, or just grab a piece of paper. and you know, you have that 5 minutes waiting for something to happen before a meeting starts somewhere. Just look around you and draw a thing. That's the best practice ever. And just that business of learning how to translate the world into your drawings is a wonderful thing.
That's definitely something I practice. Like any graphic I do, I always start with a sketch. And it's funny because sometimes I think, oh, I won't do a sketch first. And I'll be like, I think I can do it. And I'll go digital, and then it just turns into a mess. And then I have to go back and like, I should have done the sketch. So
Yeah.
it's really, really important to work out your thoughts on pen and paper first. It just, yeah, I think everything he said, I agree with. Good point.
Yeah, no, most of my work is done in Procreate. And that is, you can get the free version at first and you can start learning how to use it, because it is a bit complicated working with the layers and trying to figure out the brushes and all those things. But they also have a phone app, so you can take it on the go. You really don't need an iPad to start dabbling with digital art. So you can just start with Procreate on your phone and then move forward from there. That's how I started as well.
Yeah, I love Procreate. It's great.
All right, thanks everybody. We've had another question. So STEM and art are often presented as like opposing narratives. What is your advice for young students who feel the need to choose between one or the other? And what activities actually fit into both categories as a whole of STEM and art as in STEAM? So I'll start with Professor Clifford Johnson.
Thank you. So this goes back to, I think, remarks I made earlier, which is that I think the commonalities are curiosity, and in some ways, the quest to understand, you know, what matter is made of, or so, you know, are there new kinds of planets we haven't thought of, and those sorts of things that you think of as very much scientific questions and not art questions. Those are connected to the quest to express something visually or what have you, whether it be doing a representation of something out there in the world, like trying to do a realistic drawing or a caricature, or whether it be something completely abstract. It's still coming from the same place of trying to see how an existing thing might be put together, and then maybe exploring the what if aspect of it, the sort of pushing the possibilities through artistic expression. And we do this all the time when we're thinking about scientific questions. You know, we know about the 8 or 9, depending upon how you count, planets, right? But then we start going, well, what if there are other kinds of planets? How did these particular planets come to be? And you start exploring, perhaps theoretically at first, in order to understand then the possibility of others, and you start doing what ifs, and a lot of art is exploring like that. Now, somehow I think what's happened in the way we teach people is we've somehow created this artificial division between these things that I think are very similar, and somehow you're made to choose, right? Are you going to go on the art stream or the science stream? And so we can't with a magic wand change the way educational systems and resources are distributed or created, but certainly what we can do is resist as much as we can. So don't feel you need to make that choice. It might be that due to timetabling you had to go to the biology class and you couldn't do the art class. That doesn't mean you don't get to do art anymore, right? Do it in your spare time. Take some time out and form your own curriculum, form your own practice by just doing it and by just exploring it. And so don't make that choice, and don't feel forced to make that choice. And you can then later on, perhaps in your career, find ways of pulling in those things that weren't sort of traditionally what you were supposed to be doing for that career, but you've always been doing them. And now when you are you and you've found your own voice, perhaps in that one discipline, you can now start pulling in those other things that you never really let go, even though they told you you should. And that's what happened with me. You know, I had a very, very standard physics career, but I never stopped being interested in all those other things. Then I began to pull them in to my physics work later on.
I would add to what Clifford had said, I think, because I was at that point in my education where do I go science or do I go arts? Because it's, there's no middle ground, like you can choose just because of how the education system is set up. So then the question that helped me to choose science was like, I can still do art even when I'm in science, but I can't do all these lab work and microbiology stuff that I want at home. So that was the, like it was more of a practical question at that point. Like, what is the best way for me to take that I can still do both? So maybe those questions could also help you to decide, like, I think you have to maybe come up with a set of like, okay, at least I want this. This is my priority. And then have that guide you, where you go. Because like Clifford said, if you have a passion for both, you will find a way to mix them. And you're not going to be like, okay, I'm going to completely forget about one thing just because like system says I can't.
Thank you. I want to jump in and ask the next question to Samari and Kristen, which was from a UPR alum. And they asked, do I need a PhD or a scientific degree to be an artist? And what art training would you recommend? And how can I start a career as a scientific artist? So I want to ask Dr. Quinones and Kristen Farley to answer that question for me.
I would say that no, you don't need a PhD to be a science artist. And by the way, shout out to UPR. My PhD is in science and microbiology, and it definitely gave me the advantage of critical thinking outside the box, being creative and solving really complex problems, and have an understanding of different fields. But that is not necessary for being a science artist. And I'm not gonna speak on behalf of Kristen, but I can speak on behalf of my brother, who is also an artist, and he does not have a PhD, and he works as a graphic designer. So it is very on point with your passion and your own skills. And for me to say that I have never taken a single art class in my entire life, I have never had a single piece of training, like formal artist training. It's all me working at home in my free time, dabbling, inventing, just practicing and practicing and practicing. So that's like, I do some study hours where I just try to practice how to do just a silhouette. And the good thing about the digital art is once you have that silhouette, then you can just copy paste it to the next art and you can grow from there. And then you perfect that one and then grow from that one as well. So it's just a step-by-step process. And the one thing that happened for me is that I started posting my art in social media. And from social media, that's where it grew. So I don't work as an artist. My job is a lecturer and I work in academia. But on the side, I am known for my art. And it's amazing how I can just randomly meet people and I have no idea who they are, but they know me because of my art that they have seen in social media. And that is what has gotten me the next step in my career, which is making an art business. So you do not need a PhD to be a science artist, but you may need a PhD to be a scientist to get the street cred so then they can believe that what you're doing is reliable.
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to that. I do not have a PhD, and I you know, my training is actually opposite from the other panelists here, because I have no training in STEM, no formal training in STEM or sciences or anything like that. But I think what's beneficial, you know, what I was saying earlier at Berkeley Lab, for example, you know, I'm working with the communications department and the program development office. So they're responsible for communicating what the lab is doing to the outside world and getting money into the lab. So it's super important to be able to communicate that. And I think that's where my specialty comes in, because I don't have a background in science. So I'm able to help the scientists break down their research into layman's terms that everybody can understand. If they can get me to understand it, then they can get the rest of the world to understand it. So I'm kind of helping them close that gap. So yeah, you definitely do not need to have a PhD to become a scientific graphic artist.
All right, thanks everyone. We have a question from a class watching. So Mr. Gallardo's class asks, what are some difficulties you have experienced within your career in graphic design or STEAM? So I'll start with Moon.
Yeah, so, you know, I wouldn't say I have my career is in graphic artist, but I do it as a freelancing. But so one of the things that first came to my head is in terms of difficulty, I think this is also something we discussed earlier, that I feel like I'm an imposter in the artistic community, because like, you know, like most of us, you know, don't really have a real formal artistic training. So every time I see an artist's real like work, I'm just like, oof, you know, I can, you know, I wish I could do that. And one of the things about, you know, wanting to do both is that maybe sometimes you can't find the time. Like there's a saying that says, you know, if you want to be good at something, you need like 10,000 hours of work put into it. And if you want to be good at two things, you need 20,000 hours. And I can't find 20,000 hours. And so that's something that constantly, you know, at least it's more of a emotional difficulty in my head. Like sometimes when I make things for people, I feel like, oh, you know, this could have been better. Like I wish you know, why did they choose me? Or I have a lot of maybe insecurities surrounding that. So that would be the only difficulty, I would say, for me at least.
I would say a difficulty for me is taking myself out of it. Part of my job is to visualize someone else's ideas. Like it's not really about what I like, it's about what is best to communicate the message. You know, for example, if a client comes to me and their brand color is pink, like I don't really like the color pink, but I have to work with it because that's what their brand is. So it's really, for me, sometimes taking myself out of the equation and thinking the way the client does or the researcher does, and getting into their mind and, you know, figuring out what it is that they're trying to say. And the other thing I struggle with sometimes is, because it is art for me, it's sometimes difficult to hear criticism when something's not right. I'm like, oh, I take it really personally because I'm so attached to this artwork that I've done. So those are things that I can struggle with sometimes.
I guess for me would be like working with clients. Like I've been trained to be a scientist, to like think on my own, be on the bench or teach. So I'm not in like customer service type deal. So this is a brand new environment, and it has been a little difficult to adjust. And I want to second what Moon said about the imposter syndrome. The struggles are real. It's definitely seeing others, like right now seeing Moon's work and Kristen's and Clifford's, we're like, wow, I can't believe I'm like here. But it's a thing. So yes, insecurities.
Yeah.
There's a really important issue in addition to those, which are sort of inside looking out, and that's the outside looking in. So unfortunately, we do live in a world where people's impressions of you matter perhaps more than they should, in terms of it tends to sometimes be used more than the actual merits of the work that you do as a means of judging you. And so what that means, unfortunately, is at every career stage, the opinions of people, both to your face and also anonymously, matter a lot for that next promotion, for that grant application to be accepted and money to support your research come through. And, for that, big prize that will mean your career moves on or what have you. So why am I mentioning that? Because unfortunately, we are in this situation where people tend to have, as we already talked about, siloed these different areas. So you're a science, you're supposed to be doing science. You're a scientist, you're supposed to be doing science. You're an artist, you're supposed to be doing art, what have you. And if you're dabbling in something else, that's often perceived as not being serious, not being committed enough. That happens especially a lot in science. Especially if you look like I do in my area, well, in science in general, but in my area of physics in particular, people are looking for excuses to confirm their belief that, we're not supposed to be good at that sort of thing. So if I'm also dabbling in art, it gives people an excuse to go, well, he's not really serious. He's not really doing as well at the science as he should be, despite the fact that I, probably at any stage have been doing just as well, if not better, than many of my peers. So that means the main difficulty then comes, how visible can one be in doing these things that you're quote unquote not supposed to be doing, that have value and are extremely important for enriching the field, but it can compromise people's view of you and damage your career. So even though I am quite senior and established and well known in my field, there's always a concern that there are people looking in and going, well, he's drawing, so come on, how serious can he be about the physics? And I wish that weren't true, but I know that actually it is a problem, and it's not one that goes away entirely. So as usual, you have to run faster and jump higher than your peers in order to show that you have worth, just because you also want to do those other things that you think can help actually with the science as well. So it's worth keeping in mind that it shouldn't be, but it is doubly hard to do these things, especially in a visible way, at times in your career, because of people's perceptions, which I hope will change overall over time, but it's taking time.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for communicating about those difficulties and thinking about the fact that science communication is very important, in those outside opportunities, to better communicate science are as important, for the science to actually expand and to get out to the public and to get the funding that we've talked about, Kristen mentioned, and to help educate people. We want to go to our two last questions that we'll get to. The first one is for everyone. How do you persuade the artsy students that science is not scary, and the tech students that art is for everyone? What are the ways in which, again, we've been talking about breaking down silos for this whole conversation. What are the ways that we can do that for students now and bring those worlds together more, especially for those of you who are teaching right now? We have two, professors who are teaching courses right now. How can we better do that into the coursework or into the graphic art or the research that we do? And I'll start back with one of our professors, Dr. Quinones, if you want to start off with how can we best get both sides to think that they're not so separate?
Well, at least the way that I do it is that I incorporate art in my genetics class. So when I teach mainly by visual, so I am always showing graphs and drawings and stuff, and I tell my students to learn from looking at the art. But I also have an assignment that every student has to do either a science communication or a science art assignment from one topic that they have learned the entire semester. And I tell them the importance of incorporating the arts into a science education. I have also been giving workshops to girls in Puerto Rico from my STEAM 100 por 35 initiative. And it is how we incorporate science and art and how you can start from a young age in working those two things together. Because the way that science is moving forward is that even now, the poster that the students are presenting at conferences, they are more graphic oriented. And now they're asking for graphic abstracts. So people are recognizing the importance of using visuals as a means of communicating your science to the general public. So if we start the message early on, when they see it in their careers or they are requested by a proposal or something like that, then it's not a brand new thing and they are scared.
That's a really great question, and I think some of the things Samari mentioned, I think really resonate with what I try and do when I teach as well. One of the things that I find ironic, and it's one of the reasons I wrote and drew that book I mentioned, is the fact that we actually use visuals a lot in science already, and it is already a tool that is really extremely important for figuring out how to make connections between things and sometimes also to communicate ideas to each other. And then somehow in the business of writing books, right, this kind of science book that we're supposed to put out there for the general public, there came this bizarre convention that we're supposed to forget all of that visual stuff. It's almost a matter of pride to see how much you can try and explain this idea in words without using a diagram at all. And somehow it becomes a badge of honor if you do it all in prose, where in fact the idea that you're talking about wasn't actually born in words; it was born in visual. And so I wanted to produce a book that used the tools that we use in science actually to show them. There's this fear of showing an equation or a graph or something like that. And you're told that you'd lose audience if you put that in. And I wanted to go, no, that you're not talking about the science fully if you don't include all the tools, and that includes visuals. So that was the point, for example, of part of the point of using visuals and having a graphic book talk about science. When I come back then to teaching, indeed, we're drawing all the time, and I'm always encouraging students to do those drawings as best as you can, make them large so that you can see the relative details and things like that, little things that we don't focus on much when we teach. So it's a little bit here and there. What I would love to see is an analog of the movement that happened some years ago, where people go, oh, science students need to learn how to write better. So they, the English department puts on a course on writing essays or something like that. Well, I think the art department should put on a course on sketching. And for science students, it should be something that they do. They do a semester where they have to sit and draw a thing and see what that really means, and understand the whole and wonderful dialogue that happens in your brain between different parts of your brain in order to produce a successful drawing. And really understanding how that works can be transformative with how you draw and then how you learn to express ideas. And we don't teach that. I would love to see that somewhere on a real syllabus. Now, there's not enough room, so what can you do? At least within the teaching you do, make sure that drawing is as important a tool as some of the other things that we use to really unpack inquiry and the answers to various questions.
I really like that suggestion. I would have loved to take that class.
I actually did take courses like that in my college career. We it's really just getting my mind, the classes were fundamental principles of design, and it's really learning how to visually express something on paper, even something that's just super simple. So a graphic design program will have classes like that to help train you to do that.
Yeah, but what I mean is science students should take those classes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, that kind of leads into our final question for today's panel. So do you have any last parting words or pieces of advice for aspiring STEAM artists? I'll start with you, Kristen.
Yeah, I would really advise, I would take courses in data visualization if you can, because that teaches you how to, or even data analytics, it teaches you how to look at information and and what it's telling you, and what story is the data telling you. So really getting comfortable in learning how to visualize data would be a good course to find if you can.
Go ahead.
I can go ahead.
I think Moon, you were good. Oh.
Yeah. So just coming from someone whose background is in STEM, and if you're thinking about going more or having more opportunities in art, I would say that just say yes to any opportunities, even if it's not just scientific art. So like, I did not just start doing scientific art. You probably do all kinds of art. And the first few of my clients are from my family. They're like the best and the worst clients who just ask you things to do, and that's how you sort of start to build how it's like to work, like do art for someone else. Because if you're in science, maybe this is something that you won't have much training on. So yeah, just that, like, take any opportunities you have.
So Kate, if you want to add.
Oh, okay. Well, two words. I would say story, which is one Kristen had, and then well, comfort, I guess, would be the other single word. What do I mean? Story. I think both in both areas of endeavor, whether it be science or art, finding the story. Even in a single drawing or some big scientific enterprise or some big massive art project, there's a through line, there's a story, there's a narrative, and figuring out what that is can be extremely important for how you end up successfully communicating, successfully doing that piece of art or whatever it is. And sometimes, as Kristen has to do, she has to find what the scientific story is and then convert it into, in some sense, some visuals. Again, if it's at one graphic, there's a story in there as well. So really appreciating that so much of what we do and so much what we're in tune to as human animals, as it were, is the story. That's how we communicate. We tell each other stories. We learn through stories and things like that. So for me, a lot of it is all about the story. It's one of the reasons I'm drawn to sequential art, comics, graphic novels, what have you. There's a story told through sequences of images, but each individual image is also a story. And there's story within story within story. It's quite wonderful. And then the comfort part is getting to the opposite of that. For me, I think I'm constantly trying to get myself out of my comfort zone. That's how I learn new things. Challenge myself. Don't go for the easy. Oh, I'm good at doing this kind of thing, so I could just do more of it. Or I could go, no, I'm gonna try and work on that bit that isn't working so well. And that I think helps you grow. And actually, you then find that it actually makes you better at that thing you thought you were already pretty good at. So even, if that's within art, it's things like, for example, when I used to sketch faces back without really sitting down and learning it properly, they kind of all look the same. It was always the same face. There's that go-to face that you do, and it's great. But then I needed to do a book with several characters. I didn't want them all to look the same, so I had to force myself to really understand the face and go and do the work and and read books and study other people's approaches to it. And so you get out of your comfort zone in order to improve yourself and not just do the same old. I think that can be extremely rewarding.
I would say follow your passions, no matter what they are. Always try to do what makes you happy. And if what you're doing is not giving you satisfaction, it's okay to walk away. It is okay to say no. And just know that even you are majoring in something specific, you may not end up working in that as your career. Be open to opportunities, be open to people, and listen to your heart, because passion is what is going to get you moving forward, no matter what it is that you decide to do. If it's art, science, art, it's really what makes you happy, what makes you complete as a person. So just listen to yourself. If you want to move forward, then train yourself, get the skills. If it's not for you, it's okay to let it go.
Awesome. Thank you for those parting words from everybody and to our panelists today. So again, thank you for joining us. We have a recording of this. We are going to put this online for those who missed it. And we also thank you for those of you who stuck by, until a little after 11 with us. And we hope you join us on November 6th when we will be discussing cybersecurity and privacy and all those apps you've been downloading. What does that really mean and what's happening behind it? We hope you think about being an engineer on that day and join us for that. So thanks everyone and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.